Welcome to the Conscious Dominance Podcast, where Andrew and Eric, two dominant men in dom sub relationships, discuss how we approach our dominant roles from a conscious and loving place, and what we learn about ourselves through the deep intimacy that these power exchange dynamics make possible. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Andrew, it's good for you to be here this weekend. Put some time into thinking about what we're going to talk to. And I feel like we've talked a lot about consciousness. We've talked a lot about showing up with consciousness, but I don't feel like we've at all really dove into the word dominance and why we chose that word, why we're owning it, why we believe in it, why also it's a bit almost controversial. People are uncomfortable with that word. It's not a word that people want to hear, that you're dominating your woman or your wife. That doesn't land well with people. I'm curious your relationship with that word and why you felt it was important for us to use that word and why you own that word.
For me, it started really with the kink of dom sub and just being turned on by the idea of being in control and being in charge. The more that I've gotten into it, I love the fact that the word itself is so polarizing. And a lot of what we do, we really enjoy, and I enjoy being in a place, in a position of leadership. And Dawn enjoys being in a place of surrendership, of followership. So we lean into this because what is the opposite of dominance? Dominance is all about being in control, being in charge, being in the lead. And we have to have things in their opposites in order to experience the energy of and the intensity of what polarity can do. So the word dominance for me really represents the intensity with which I want to lead, the intensity with which I want responsibility, and what I crave both in relationship and inside myself. I'm not afraid of it, and I kind of like the fact that it triggers some people and pisses them off, because that's a great way to start conversations too.
You said a word that I want to highlight there, responsibility. I don't feel nobody wants to take responsibility for something that they don't dominate. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? If you're not in control of something, it's hard to take responsibility for it. You don't really good luck. But I feel like it's in some ways, if we could see dominance and responsibility being equal sign, if you could just say dominance equals responsibility equals dominance, I think that's a lot more palatable for people. But I think the responsibility notion of taking responsibility for your life, it is also taking control of it. It is also taking command of it. And people use that word, I love that you just said that you love the kind of that it polarizes people. And I I feel into the word polarity too. And I want to get into that a little bit with this because I think that's really important. And I think the thing that I want to throw out there that is we can have the word dominance and it doesn't necessarily mean you don't get a voice. I feel like there's such a ridiculous, immature notion of masculinity that is like all there is just do it my way. Fuck you. Eh. Or just we're gonna just sit there and be like kumbaya and just get along in a very equal, depolarized kind of way. That there isn't something else. That there is another option. And this other option is how we use the word dominance. And I mean, any decent leader, any really quality leader that's over the long term, like I've talked about in previous podcasts with level 5 leadership or a great team captain, or there's so many examples of this. You're not necessarily coming in there to be a tyrant. And so the difference between like tyranny and dominance, they're not the same thing. Like dominance and tyranny are not the same. And so I would love for you to extrapolate and speak to why you love the word dominance and why we need to reclaim that word.
I've One of the things that really started to turn the corner on this for me and connect all of these dots was I read David Deida's book, The Way of the Superior Man years ago, and I liked it, but it went way over my head. Once Dawn and I had been in the relationship, in the dom-sub relationship, you know, for those who have heard our story, I asked her to be my submissive after 8 years of a very unconscious vanilla marriage and 10 years in a relationship with her. And then I asked her to change course essentially with our relationship. We started going down this road of her becoming my submissive, me stepping into a dominant role inside of our relationship. And then I had more context. And when I came back and read Way of the Superior Man again, once I had some context of living my life with more responsibility, with more being in charge and control, that book landed in a totally different way for me. And one of the ways that maybe more so than anything is how he talks about the 3 stages of masculinity. The first stage being kind of the tyranny, right? It's the club her over the head, caveman, drag her back to the cave kind of energy. This is the machismo kind of energy around masculinity. But then he talks about the second stage of masculinity being the nice guy. It's the I'll be the good boy, you like we're going to be equals. It's a very depolarized state. It's a very like conflict minimal kind of a state, but it's a different version of masculinity that the way he says it is the stage 1 is all spine and no heart, and stage 2 is all heart and no spine.
Well said.
And stage 3 in his book is a man who has claimed his spine, or as I like to say, his ball sack, and kept his heart open at the same time. And to me, that is what epitomizes dominance and that's what I equate dominance to. I don't equate dominance to that first stage of all spine and no heart. I don't think that's dominant. I think that's weak. We've talked at length about why a man who is all up in his control kink is not truly dominant if he's so easily triggered and so reactive and has to just shut her down every time she feels everything. That's not dominant in my book, but in any just shred of the
Really.
imagination.
And I think a good way to think of it is that the stage 1 is you're trying to be dominant in the external
Mhm.
world, and you don't really even realize that there's an internal world. You don't realize you have an internal inner life, and that things on the outside could be going, "Whoa," she could be going crazy, she could be doing all this, but that you can be holding your spine, you could be holding your heart, your love, you could be holding your energy, your frequency. And that capacity to do that is really what defines the stage 3. It's really is that you start realizing you have an inner world and an outer world, and the inner world is not something to shy away from. And I think there's a wonderful podcast just recently that I was just listening to with James Hollis and Andrew Huberman. It's excellent. And it was all about he's a therapist, but a Jungian therapist, and speaking a lot about the inner world and men's kind of reluctancy to get in there. And that in the second half of life, we need to, because ultimately we realize wake up one day, it's not about whoever has the most toys wins. It's just not about how much sand you have or having the hottest woman or whatever. There's a certain limitation if we base our life around happiness. And his main point is that we need to find meaning. There needs to be something deeper. And if the woman feels like she is the object and the focus of your attention, and your whole life is about her, and your whole life is you've got this woman, this sub, she's it, then all of a sudden you've created a codependent relationship with her. So ultimately, you have her, but ultimately she is not the final conquest. The final conquest is you and what lights you up. And she's a part of that, but she's not the only thing. And so your capacity to keep myself, it with the embers of what delights me and what provides meaning and keep returning to that allows me to stay in that third level. And that is a dominance. That is commanding. That is having control, but it's not concerned with the external control. I'm more interested in the internal control. Again, there's great examples of this throughout history. I think there's great books of and people that have been in concentration camps or been at prisoners of war, whatnot, and they're able not to be controlled by. They're able the mind, you can't control the mind. You can control your own mind even when you're in a situation that's really ominous on the outside. People that get really sick, people that are injured. The external world is one metric among many for how we find our success. And it's really truly our capacity, my capacity to come out when I've fallen, when I've hurt myself, when I've lost something, when there's grief, when something comes my way that maybe I had nothing to do. How do we get up and how do we maintain our calm and our cool? That's mental health and that's not being triggered and that's being anti-fragile. That's all those things. That's
Mhm.
dominant. That's dominant. So people are saying like, "Oh, I don't like the word dominant." No, you gotta dominate the situation. You have to dominate. Can't let life come at you and be the victim. It's either like you're surrendering and you're submissive or you're dominant. One or the other. They're feminine, masculine. And there's two different poles. This doesn't mean though that there are times where we need to surrender. There are times that we get into the first stage. There are times we're in stage two. There are times we're in stage one. There's times that we're in a surrendered state. But if we just live in the surrendered state all the time or we're unconscious of it, that's when it becomes problematic. And ultimately, it's when we're in our surrendered place or when we're in a tough place, that actually requires dominance. That requires us to go there and have control and show up when we're hurt, when we feel like shit, when we're off. And I know you know all this, but I just feel like I keep hearing so much poo-poo, toxic masculinity, toxic dominance, all this stuff. It's such bullshit because what you're doing is you want to create these weak people running around. And they're ultimately the scariest thing in the world is a man who's not allowed to have his power and not allowed to stand in it and find his way through that and find it in a responsible way.
Yeah, a weak man or a soft man is the most dangerous man because he's just completely repressed his strength. He hasn't come into ownership
Mhm.
of it. He hasn't come into a healthy relationship with his power and with his sense of self-control. But I heard this statement a long time ago, and it's something that hit me so fucking deeply. It still rings through my head in all sorts of different contexts. And that was that it's no wonder that most women don't trust men because most women have never met a man.
Yeah.
There are a lot of adult males. There are a lot of large human beings with male organs, but being born with a dick doesn't make you a man. It makes you a male. What makes you a man is your capacity to hold strength, to lead, to take charge. And people don't have the context. They don't have the examples of truly powerful and open heart
Yeah.
examples of it to reference. So we get then a world that thinks of masculinity as people have seen it. And of course, why wouldn't that be what people lean on? Because it's the only thing most people have experienced. And that's what I think our job is as men is to come into a healthy ownership of our strength, a healthy ownership of our masculinity, a healthy sense of dominance, where we can take control of a situation. We can take control of ourselves. We can lead. We can take responsibility. Even when things go badly, we can take responsibility, even if what went badly is because of a decision that I made.
Especially
Yeah.
when it's something that we did and we made a
But most
mistake.
people's context of men is blaming, it's defensiveness, it is shirking responsibility, it's avoidance, it's numbing. This is what how most men go through their lives and live most of their lives. And so it's no wonder that people don't trust men and that people think masculinity is toxic or that dominance is bad. They haven't experienced anything other than that. And that's what we get to offer them, not just our women, but the world is an example of what men really can be.
Well said. And I think a couple things that I want to say to that. One, the masculinity that's out there, that's this dominance with all spine. There's a place for that. I think the notion that that is toxic and all wrong and bad, no, that's a
Mhm.
tool. That's necessary sometimes. That's an important part of what it is to be a man, and that has a place. But it's like a one note wonder, one part. We need to have range. It's the same thing with sex. You have one thing, you gotta have range. You gotta have the whole part of it. This is the same thing with masculinity. There's more range to it. And I think that range includes this heart. And this heart is the capacity, like we've talked about, to be able to hold space, to be able to contain, to be able to lead, to be able to be conscientious. I think conscientious is a really good word for masculinity. And that if you have dominance and you have commanding control, this is when you have responsibility. So isn't it not in my nature, in my intention, if I have people in my life for the long term, that I want to strengthen them, that I want to give them power, that I want to give them voice, that I want to give them a capacity to make decisions on their own, to be happy. Like everybody's better off for this notion that I'm just going to come in here and get. It's such an immature version of it. It's such a version where my ego is too sensitive to withstand a voice or something. This version is such a limited version of it. And what we're offering is it over here is not to get rid of this. It's to include that, but that there's a more expansive notion of that. And that more expansive notion holds our women in the long term in a much more regenerative kind of way. I feel like regeneration, we talked about this as one of the principles, but we'll talk about it. I don't know if we've released that episode yet, but one of the principles, the pillars of being a conscious dominant is regeneration. And that is the notion that when things are really difficult, bad, where there's quote unquote ego deaths or injuries or things that are off or whatever, that these are opportunities not for the end of the end, but we welcome them because we know on the other side we will be stronger, we will be better.
Yeah, when I think about this third stage masculinity, I really do think about it as all spine and all heart. It's like the
Yep.
200% man, right? It's not all spine and no
Yep.
heart. It's not all heart and no spine. It is all heart and all spine. It is retaining the capacity to be an absolute monster if and when I need to. If someone's attacking someone that I love, if there's a physical attack on someone I love, all the heart in the world doesn't matter. At that point, I'm going to become a monster. If someone's attacking me, I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to become a monster. And I have that capacity
Mm-hmm.
inside of me and I've come to grips with it. I've gotten to know it. I've accepted it and integrated it into me rather than shamed it out of me. I've also done the same thing
Mm-hmm.
with my heart. And we do talk a lot on this podcast about the heart, which is essential and important. And it's frankly a lot harder to do. But it's a lot harder for a man to integrate his heart in a lot of cases than it is for him to integrate his strength. But we have to be able to
Mm-hmm.
do both. We have to be able to be a monster and we have to be able to be dominant enough over ourselves that we can hold
Mm-hmm.
everything that happens.
Truth. And I think that there's no way to really do this. It's such an inside job. It's such a job for me. It's been such a job for me inside with me on my own alone. And I don't, it's impossible to really be able to be and arrive in this place without having gone through some sort of rite of passage, some pain, something that gets you shaken up, that where there are some ego deaths, some real suffering of the soul to come out the other side. Because otherwise, if my previous version of myself wants to live out at the way that I was brought up and wants to live out the way society is putting forth with me. And in those ways, we're unconsciously not dominant. We're unconsciously under surrendering or submitting to an external force and an external paradigm. And most people are unaware that they're actually living out someone else's thought, someone else's paradigm, someone else's vision of their life, and then taking that out on their woman. And that the woman and you, for me, Rachel and I, we're actually co-creating something new, something different, something alive, something that we've never had yet. And if I have a vision of that and I'm trying to hold her, I'll keep her small, but the vision has to be an expansive vision. It has to be a vision that allows for that to move past.
I I just can't help but think, Eric, that it seems like most of the time you mentioned like we need something, right? We need something to bring us to the seeing or the recognizing of the fact that we're just like that we're going in the wrong direction. And it just hit me as you were saying that it's almost like men will let everything crumble around them before they see. Do we really have to go to rock bottom? Do we have to destroy everything around us? Do we have to, end up with a substance abuse problem or having our whole families abandon us or have addictions take over? Do we really have to go into these places of deep pain in order to see ourselves? And I would like to say that we don't have to, but by and large, after years now of coaching and working with men, the men that find their way to some sort of an open-hearted expression seems to happen after they have hit some kind of a rock bottom.
Sure. No, I totally agree. I don't, it's because of pain. Ultimately, it all comes back to pain. Men, like everybody, humans, we're wired to avoid pain. And so we live our life in the avoidance of this pain and of the suffering. But once you've tasted it, and once you've gone there, and once you've been there, and once you've lost all the things that you thought were going to make you happier, that were holding you, on the other side is a liberation. Other side is a lightness. Other side is something where you don't have to live your life out of shame. You don't have to live. How much of my life have I lived because I'm worried about somebody else or something? It keeps you in such a small little box, in such a constrictive place. And the liberation comes when it's and on the other side of it. I think a lot of people feel afraid that if they get to have whatever they want and do whatever they want, they'll go live some sort of lifestyle, just fucking party or
Yeah,
whatever. Maybe you need to do. Maybe you go do that. Go have those experiences if that's where you're at. You will find that last. There'll something. Well, you have to. There's got to be something that's sustainable, and the sustainable quality is really responsibility. Like, you can't have sustainability without responsibility. So the dominance is equated for the long term to responsibility, to sustainability. So dominance in the moment, in the short term, yeah, you can shirk the responsibility, go dominate the moment. But we're talking here is the dominance that's over the long period of time. And it's interesting. I looked up the word dominance and the etymology. It's obvious, but it comes from dominos, from Latin, from God. And it's not to say that we are God, but we are an expression of God. We are an expression that something's trying to live through us. That and we're not special to that. I think every single masculine energy out there can express God. And I think every feminine energy and body out there wants to surrender to an acute expression of that God. And I'm not to say that the feminine can express God herself. Obviously, that's true. But I think that there is a certain harmony that takes place. It's a beautiful polarity when the feminine energy and the masculine is expressing what we call God or light, whatever the word you want to use, and that the feminine is able to receive that. When she's held in that and received that, she taps into God. And so she becomes an expression of that. She starts experiencing it, and then it feeds back, and then it feeds back. Then all of a sudden, you have something that's like way beyond something here. And it's magic. It's fucking magic. It changes you and it transforms you. And I surrender to her when I'm in that space. So when I say dominance, I'm not to say I'm dominating 24/7, but I am conscious. 24/7 of what the moment is.
See how this lands, Eric. I remember saying this on a podcast that I was being interviewed on a couple years ago, and it just came out of me this way, but it was so perfect
Mhm.
that it is my job to reflect the consciousness of God to Dawn, and her job to
Right.
reflect the heart of God to me.
Ooh,
So
yeah,
so we
yeah.
become a mutual expression of the energy of love, of God, of truth, of whatever word you wanna put to it. But I'm meant to receive the heart of God. She's meant to receive the consciousness of God, and this is why union, when we eventually, if you go far enough down the path of loving dominance and submission, you find your way to something called divine union, which is really becoming one with God through the connection of masculine and feminine, because I am not built to reflect the heart of God. That's why a guy who's spouting off his feelings never comes across as strong and desirable. And it's why a woman who is bulldozing her way through life isn't going to be particularly desirable for a masculine man. Sh-
It's
So
true.
we together, and this is how I perceive the yin and yang. It's how I perceive the Shiva and Shakti. It's how I perceive all of these different things that have tried to get at the equal but opposite nature of the masculine and feminine. And in Dawn essentially surrendering, like, these words really start to get deep, and it's where I lose people sometimes because they think, "Oh, I can't, that seems like too much." But for her, really to surrender consciousness, and for me to surrender heart, so that she can be in the full expression of the God energy of her heart. I can be in the full expression
Mm.
of the God energy of my consciousness. And we create something that is the closest thing that I've ever experienced to heaven on earth, when we are in the full mutual surrender and the full complete expression of the truth.
And you're speaking unless you've experienced it, it goes over. When I've heard, like you said, when I first read David Data's book, when I've read a lot of the stuff and I get to experience it, it went over my head. I didn't really feel it. I didn't really quite understand it, but I love what you're saying because I'm experiencing this. And I want to just take one word out. When you said surrendering, that it's your job to surrender the heart, and then her job to surrender her
Consciousness.
consciousness in that moment. There's truth to that because one of the things that I've found as I've gone down this path that, whoa, I mean, it's intense. Isn't it wild? Okay, I don't know if you can relate to this. The When you've surrendered your heart and you're in that moment, there's a emptiness. Like when I'm let me say the opposite. So there are times in my relationship with Rachel where I'm feeling a lot. I'm feeling a lot of pain. I'm feeling sensitive. I know at the point we've made many times is nothing wrong with this. But when I'm in that state and I'm unconsciously bringing to her that, I'm what I would call in my feminine, or I'm in a depolarized situation. And if I'm unaware of it, and that feels like I'm just mushy and in my heart, a lot of that. If I'm bringing that to her, that's not wrong for me to have all those feelings, but I should be taking that myself, digesting, working with them, writing, meditating, whatever, finding sort of bringing consciousness to that and feeling it and then looking at it, not judging it. There's a whole sort of path process with that. Now, if I bring to her a moment, like last night, there was a moment where I was in a group therapy and I came out and I was feeling a little mushy and I didn't pre-pave anything and I came in and I was just feeling a little off. And then she fell off because I was feeling off. And then her offness triggered my off. And then pretty soon we're off to the races. But it didn't last long because we both knew what was going on and it all just leveled itself out. But one of the things that I found really interesting is when you were just talking about this surrendering my heart, in that moment, if I'm able to take that and instead of going up there with my heart, if I'm able to take my heart and be like, you know what? It's not about me and my heart in this moment. It's about the purity, present consciousness and emptiness of the moment up there. You literally, it's the same thing happens sexually, the same thing happens. There's an emptiness to it. There's like feels like beautiful minimalism. I don't know if you've ever been in a exquisite gallery or museum or a minimalist place, and it's just this light coming in. It's just beautiful
Mhm.
space. I love minimalism. I love art. There's a great space up in New York called Dia Beacon. The light comes in. It's very empty, minimal. Many examples of this. Tada Ando's work. He's a great architect. Does this as well. But there's this feeling of emptiness that's there. It's exquisite, and all that's left is nature. Like it's literally a container for nature. That's what we do. We are the container for nature. And we'll talk more about container later, but that the dominance is actually our capacity to be and to bring and to be a host, to be empty in our heart. But yet it's a paradox because there's an emptiness, but we're not without spine. We're not without full awareness of the moment and of the situation and of the temperature and of what's happening and where she
Mhm.
is and what are her needs and the time of day and what's happening next. And there's a full situational awareness of the moment. And yet there's also a stillness. And it's very much like being a badass athlete or badass musician where time slows down and everything plays out. That's the mindset and that's the approach that we want to aspire to carry to our women all the time. It works and it's magic. It leads where she was in a bad state, tough state. And yet by the time we were going to bed, we were yummy and romantic and it was lovely. And there was this because I know how to drive the energy. That's the dominance. The dominance is the capacity to take and alchemize and transform this mushy part. And yeah, you might have a moment where this comes up. Her job is to reflect back, hey, you're mushy, or say it if I don't get it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
anyway.
it's really helpful to think of ourselves like batteries when we start thinking about this. I
Hmm.
love this metaphor that as a man, every battery, right, it has the plus and the minus on it.
Hmm.
And the plus is where the electricity goes out from. And the minus
Hmm.
is where the electricity comes back into because it all has to make a full circuit. So for us as men, our battery, the plus is down. The If you think about me as a double A battery, the plus is down because I am bringing my masculine energy that is in my cock, that is in my ability to penetrate sexually, but in my ability to penetrate the world with my energy, with the truth that's in me, with that God energy that I get to channel. My negative, my minus, my inner feminine is my heart. This is the receptive the balancing receptive point. So if I'm going to be in my stage 3, in my true dominance, I'm going to be dominating the world around me. I'm going to be taking charge. I'm going to be taking responsibility, taking the lead. And the extent to which I'm doing that, if I'm reflecting the consciousness of God in that way, I need to be equally receptive back into that negative pole. This is polarity, right? The positive pole. The negative pole has to take back in as much as I'm going out with.
That's why the heart has to stay open. And that's why you can't get triggered.
Exactly. Because really, it's all, you've heard me use this phrase before, it's all information. It is all information. Everything that is going on around you, everything that's happening is just information. We have to drop the walls
Mhm.
and the meaning making and everything that we do to try to shape and understand that. And it comes back to all of this. We have to be going out as much as we can with the truth. We have to be taking the lead and taking responsibility as men who are acting in consciousness. But we have to be equally as open and receptive. Otherwise, we're just the stage 1, right?
100%. So I just was thinking about it. It's you take an action, you get a response, you make an adjustment, take an action, get a response, make an adjustment, take an action, get a response, make an adjustment. This is the law. You don't take any actions. you're not in your masculine. Masculine by definition is
Yep.
penetrative. There those actions, you have to risk doing it wrong. You have to risk being the fool. That's why I love in tarot, when I the tarot, I'm a big fan of all this stuff that's often associated with a lot of woo-woo and spiritual shit. But anyway, I
Well,
approach it from my
see,
own
this goes
way.
right over my head.
And
So
if
you go ahead and speak, and I'll learn
yeah,
something here.
speak to it. Okay, so the tarot deck, long time. This is actually holding the mysteries and the mystic of the universe. It's in the tarot deck. It's in it. And it's hidden in it. And the idea is that there's a fool, and the fool is on a journey through life, and that's through the story of the tarot. And the tarot is non-linear because life's non-linear. And so that the story is you start a fool and you end a fool. And it's just like when Jesus said that you start as a child and then you have to return to being a child to come through the kingdom of heaven. This is what it is. But to be a child on the other side, to be a fool, is to be wise. And it's don't take it literally. But the part that I mean by being a fool is that you're willing to take an action and have the world view you as a fool. You're not a fool, but the world thinks you're a fool. There's certain people out in the public that people call a fool. Maybe they are actually bringing a lot of wisdom that we don't know, but the world wants to label them a fool. So this we have to risk being a fool in the same way that in the old days, men would risk death often. You go out and you risk death. Today, most men stay small because they're afraid to be thought of as a fool. And you got to risk it. You got to be women respect you risking. Rachel respects me for taking the risk, even if I make a mistake. But women don't like it if you keep making the same mistake over and over again. So that's hence the journey. If you just keep making the same mistake, that's not necessarily what we're here talking about. But the capacity to make a mistake and then you learn from it and then grow and then move from it and then grow and then move from it. But that's also part of dominance because you're not the dominance in the old version is I don't want to act because I'm afraid of making a mistake. People will find out that I'm not in control of the external environment. So what we're talking about is no, if it's not about just making the external controlling the external environment, then we don't mind making a mistake because at the end of the day, it's not about controlling the external environment. It's about dominating ourselves inside of ourselves and holding ourselves and commanding ourselves. That's the dominance. And I also wanted to speak of, I think of it, and I think you relate to this too, that if there's concentric circles, the first thing that we do is we take responsibility for ourselves. And then we take responsibility if we have children for our children. And then we take responsibility, we have a woman for her. And then we take responsibility for a home. And it just goes out like this. And I think a lot of men, they're running out in the world, trying to change the world, trying to affect and dominate the world. And at home, they've got a kid, or somewhere else, they have a kid, and they're taking responsibility. Or they have a woman and they're not taking responsibility for her, commanding her. And then yet they're trying to command the world. That's when the things are messed up. That's why the world is because you're skipping steps. And so part of what I think when I think of spiritual integrity is that there's a sequence to it. There's a sequence. And when we skip steps, it doesn't work. You got to do one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing. You try to skip steps, try to cheat the system. And men, we try to cheat it. Sooner or later, you're gonna come back down around, and that happens. And that integrity to me is really about not skipping steps. And part of not skipping steps is taking responsibility first for yourself, and then and then out here. And that's the dominate. That's the dominance,
And you
like that.
realize that you have been out here trying to manage
Ah,
everything else, but not dealing with we avoid ourselves and our own like self-care more than we avoid almost anything else, I think.
truth.
And
Yeah, that's
but it's so hard to come back to a place of putting yourself first. It seems almost impossible when if you've built your whole life around putting yourself last. And this is why I will stand on this hill until the day that I die, that there is no virtue in self-sacrifice. There's no virtue in sacrifice. People like to preach like a doctrine of sacrifice as though it's an unquestionable good. And it isn't. In my deepest ability to speak the truth, sacrifice is never a virtue. We are not, as men, built to be a plow horse. If we sacrifice ourselves, we are sacrificing the very thing on which the people around us rely. We're sacrificing what people count on. We are an essential part of our lives, of our families, of our communities. And if we are throwing ourselves on the sword, we aren't doing anyone any good. There's always, this is from Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, but beware someone who preaches the doctrine of self-sacrifice, because close by is always someone who's collecting the sacrificial offerings.
With one caveat. The one caveat is beware of the sacrifice over the long term. But in the moment, I think there are times, just like you said before, where woe is the person who's going to come after your woman. Woe is the person who's going to come into the might. You will sacrifice yourself to protect the people
That's
that you
not a
love.
sacrifice.
There are,
That is not.
see, that needs to be brought up,
Yep.
though. That needs to be brought. The difference between the way you're using the word sacrifice and the way you just said that, I speak about that.
You've heard me say before that in this union thing, the way that I was describing before, right? I'm reflecting the consciousness of God. Donna's reflecting the heart of God. And together we are creating something bigger than what either one of us could create on our own. I put her needs before mine. That is not a sacrifice. That is an active choice for a greater experience, for a bigger life, the way that it has to be. That is not a sacrifice. I'm gaining from that. I'm gaining her heart. I'm gaining her openness. I'm gaining her trust. I'm gaining her freedom. And I'm gaining her energy and eros as a part of my life by putting her first so that she can feel safe enough. So I'm not sacrificing myself by putting my needs after hers. And if I make a choice to trade my life to save hers, if someone's attacking her, if someone is somehow going after her and I jump in front of her and I take it for her, I didn't sacrifice myself. I made a choice. I made a damn choice, and that is not sacrificial. That is a positive choice that I've made because I made a decision. I haven't sacrificed anything.
I think that's beautifully said. I want to go back to what you just said about, it's interesting when you were saying putting her needs before your own. It seems to contradict what you've also espoused to saying prioritize yourself, take care of yourself first. How do you reconcile that?
Ooh, that is a good one. No one's ever asked me that question.
I live it, so that's why I live that question.
Again, I'll say that putting myself first to some extent is putting her needs before mine, taking care of myself, because there are pieces of life that I cannot touch. There are experiences of life that I cannot touch. That a woman is different than me. And I can only experience certain things through her. There are certain things that she can't touch that I can. Experiences of consciousness and of the world that she isn't built to hold for herself, but she can experience them through surrendering to me. Taking care of myself, in part, is giving myself the most full-rounded experience of life, of God, of universe, of source, of truth that I can. And a part of that is taking care of the other half of my soul that is her, through which I can access something, not only through her, but through what we can create and do co-create together.
What's interesting is when I talked about those circles, I think there is a certain giving of ourself to whatever we're devoted
Mhm.
to. So if we're devoted to our children, to our work, there is something that we over there is a giving of it, but that is because there's almost this contract that we're getting something
It's
in
a trade.
return. And I think it's a trade, and there is a consciousness that's bringing consciousness to that. And I think when men are just out there giving it willy-nilly to random people, that's when it's problematic. And what one of the things that I think that you said that's really interesting, and can I ask this question? Are you think that the masculine in its quintessence is designed to be to be unselfish and to give to the feminine? And is the feminine in her quintessence designed to be selfish and to receive and want more?
In let's go back to the battery metaphor,
Yeah,
because it is absolutely it's a necessity for me to give to her, to
right.
give everything that I am and everything that I have to her, and she is built to receive it because her battery is flipped the
Mhm,
other way, right?
mhm,
Her pussy, her womb, that is a receptive force. She is sexually receptive, but she that is also a model of the the energy of Eros, right? I give it, she receives
mhm,
it. Sex is modeling a bigger picture of life and energy for us. So, in the realm of the physical, in the realm of the sexual, yes, 100%. She's supposed to be selfish and receive. I'm supposed to be selfless and give. And that is only half of the picture because then what comes back to me, right? Before you said, take an action, get a result or get a feedback. Take an action, you get feedback. Every
mhm,
time that I give and she receives, if she is as cultivated in her expression as I am in mine, I'm getting back in energy what I'm giving in the physical. I'm getting back in the
mhm,
energy of love, of sex, of desire, of emotion
mhm,
in a way that I need from her. I can't do it on my own. We're not built to do this
mhm.
alone. We're built to do this in partnership.
It
Mhm.
feeds us. Yeah, it's interesting when you look out there and women, we often associate women as giving a lot, the mothers, and overly generous and verges in this almost like martyry place often, sometimes not. And the more that I sit around and I'm really feeling when we're in polarity, Rachel and I, her whole life, she's been an exquisite conscious dom in a lot of ways. Like she's been the one that's been giving. She's been the one holding space. She's been the one doing all the things that I do with her. And one of the things that I was been thinking about and realizing is like, gosh, the way that we have a hard time understanding what masculinity is nowadays. And we associate it so much with this one version that we have, Rambo. Love Rambo. It was called Rambo as a kid. So don't think that I'm dissing it, but that's just one part of it. And we are missing something else. And I was thinking, oh my God, the other part that we're missing is that it's almost if you took a Rambo and you combined it with an awesome mother, that's actually closer to what we're talking about in the sense that an awesome mother is alert, is aware, is conscientious, is figuring out who's doing what, schedules, is who's what school are they going, all the details, all the numbers, all the stuff, the teacher. There's a quality of that that we need to combine the two to be a conscious dom. It truly is. And it sounds crazy to say these two things because they couldn't be more opposite. But a woman in her feminine and pure feminine energy is not what most mothers, when they're super hyper aware and doing all that work, they're actually in their masculine. They're actually in their masculine. And that trips the fuse of a lot of people. And then a lot of men are actually then get thrust into their feminine and they're just feeling a lot, checked out, not there. That's actually when the batteries got
Mhm.
flipped. And the more that I'm aware and really taking conscious, it doesn't mean I'm doing everything, but I am aware of what's happening in my kids' lives way more. I'm aware of the fact what the kids' friends' names are. I'm aware of their teachers, and I'm just aware and alert to all these things in the same way that I would be alert with my work, with all of the different aspects of that, or whatever I was interested in. And I think that's what it really takes is there's a certain that's what it is to be conscientious. And so the things that we are dominating, we need to be conscientious of. We need to be tending, aware of, and build those concentric circles as we expand. And that's what it really is. And that's what we're speaking about in this. It's not my way or the highway. That's such a shallow. We're interested in the longer term, the longer, more sustainable way of this lasting. And then that's why when things go bad or wrong, you've got really strong people that can do things, and you're not even needed because things are up and running and things are going.
Yeah, that really does sum it up pretty well. And we get to then, when we flip these batteries back and we get them in the right order, it's going to confront a lot of the old patterns and the reasons why we had them flipped the wrong way in the first place. And that's what all the
Right.
challenge is. That's what the battle is getting ourselves back into alignment with really what we were born to be. And that
Right.
to bring it full circle here, that is what dominance is. It is taking back ownership of our masculine expression in relationship with our woman to the point that we can be commanding with her, to the point where we can be demanding of her, that we can be dominant, but not dominant over her, dominant in taking responsibility for her so that she can let go and be in that receptive feeling state that is her natural expression. And she needs us to do that. And we need her to help bring us into ours. And that is what dominance is to me, is leading that reclamation project of our true authentic energies.
Well said. And I think it's not just I think the way when you say lead is an important part of this, it's taking leadership. And leadership doesn't mean you do everything, but it means you're
Means
aware
you're the
of
responsible.
what needs
The
to be
buck
done.
drops with me.
It means you're responsible. Exactly. And you're aware and you are aware of the container and what's needed for the container. I'd like to end this right now. I think that this is a good place to end. And I think the next time I want to talk about container. I've heard that word thrown around. And so let's talk about that next time and appreciate this today. Appreciate you, Andrew,
Thank you,
always.
sir. Glad to be here.
Let's do it. All right.